on this topic of, hiring more senior talent. What are some things that you've learned in hiring more senior engineering talent? So now that we're especially talking about both the confidence aspects and the competence aspects, are the things that you look for, in a VP of engineering radically different than what you would look for in, say, a director of engineering? Like what are some of the differences in your mind?
I've classified, let's just take all the kind of levels and bucket them into the straight up titles. So we have manager, director, VP as an example. One of the ways in which I try to frame this so I can actually answer this question is that you have a manager, and some people think of director as manager plus plus. I like to think of director as VP minus minus. So now that we have that out of the way, what I tend to look for is in a manager, I want someone who's basically going to be that pack leader. It's kind of like, hey, this is what where the company is going. This is what we're supposed to be doing. This is how we're going to get there. Let's fill in the blanks. Let's get it done. That's the line. And they're going, and the manager is effectively going back around to all the other pack leaders and saying like, hey, we still on track? Are we still over? Like all that sort of stuff. If you think about backcountry hiking and with 15 different groups of people who are supposed to be kind of like commonality, going in the same direction, but are off on their own for whatever reason type of deal. That's what a manager does. And a director has to be above that. A director has multiple versions of those, so it has to be kind of above and spotting out. So spotting out forward and ahead and spotting out back towards like whatever base camp you might have or all that sort of stuff. But they have to be doing it in some sort of an abstracted way. And then VP obviously is like really setting up like all the different directions and all that sort of stuff. They're not executing on any of them, but they're making sure they're all kind of going in path. The skill set I want in a VP is I really want somebody who is hyper technical. I want hyper technical across the board. And I want people who get stuff done. Like their orientation is hyper technical, get stuff done, and then, kind of get out of the way when they don't need to. Now, the difference here is that I want people to also understand this last context importantly. VPs don't get paid to make every decision. VPs get paid to make $100 million decisions. And that might be 4 of those a year type of deal. But in the meantime, what they're doing is they're making 4 of those one-way door, $100 million decisions that only they can make. Rest of the time, what they're doing is making sure everyone else is making the decisions that are appropriate to them. And so it's not that they're not doing anything else. What they're doing is making sure all the other decisions are getting made, but appropriately. And then they're, pressure testing those decisions too, to a degree, but they're not making, they're just making sure that they're getting made and they're getting made well. And if you take that all the way down the chain, you can understand what the jobs are.
Yeah, that's a super interesting approach. It's almost like they're designing the system through which the decisions get made, and then they kind of exception handle for the really, really major ones.
And one thing I would caveat in that right there is I do see that there's a failure mode that I see some VPs, particularly first-time VPs take, which is they will sit down and they will talk about process a lot. And I think this is an over-orientation for first-time VPs. And what you really want in that situation is you want, like, there's that old Silicon Valley cliche, which is like, strong opinions weakly held or something like that. What you really want is you want kind of like a loose-ish sort of a process. You really want speed or safety, or like there's a bunch of orientations that you should pick. It's not the process. The process must support the orientation you're after. And in that way, there's no perfect process. There's no perfect org structure. There's no perfect XYZ. You just have to understand if the orientation that you want is what you're getting.
Jason, this sounds like a really important insight. Can we, is there an example that you can think of, even if it's, it's real, fictional, where there may be an over-reliance on process?
I mean, so again, like another mistake I made over 15 years ago at this point was when Agile XP, all that sort of stuff started to pop out. You said, hey, we're having an execution problem. And these things seem like this panacea type of approaches, like, hey, this is what we're going to do. Like, this is what we got, like, Toyota systems and all that sort of stuff. And you get into it, and what you realize is that you don't understand how to execute in the first place, but you don't understand what you're after too. And so you become reliant on mechanical portions of quote unquote process, burn down charts or sizing meetings or all this sort of stuff. And then you get embroiled in debates over, well, was it a t-shirt size XL or a t-shirt size L? What do we define as t-shirt size XL versus L? Oh, wait, hang on a sec. How do we handle, like, all of a sudden you've lost sight of everything along the way. Now, this feels important in the moment until you get more experience and you realize all that stuff is performative. And so this is where I start to rail on OKRs. And it's not that I don't like OKRs. I think they're an amazing aligning tool. But if you ever find yourself in the middle of an executive debate where the entirety of the last 2 hours of debate was whether or not that was a K or an R, which happens all the time. Like, hey, was that an O, was that a K, or was that an R? Let's debate like whether or not the words are right and like the orientation of the sentence is correct. We're starting to lose the plot again. Most companies, in fact, I would say that the majority of companies that any of us who are listening to this are going to work in, could literally work off the sheet of one sheet of paper of aligning, literally. And then what you can do is like a one sheet of paper approach of each team can say like, this is what's important to us and this is how we're going to execute. I give on my Twitter, which is just Twitter, Jason C. Warner. I have a pinned tweet from DJ Patil, who used to be working in the White House. And he's got this picture he drew. And if you give me a moment, I want to go find it and read it off to you, because I think it's really important. And I think one of my prime jobs in any engineering leader, any leader in general, is to simplify. And there's a picture. It says, dream in years, plan in months, evaluate in weeks, ship daily. Prototype for 1x, build for 10x, engineer for 100x. What's required to cut the time in half? What's needed and what needs to be done to double the impact? Now, again, like that is not an execution plan. That is not how you're going to operate day to day, but it's an important reorientation to simplify everything that we have these discussions around. And I find that right there, the reliance on process, the OKRs, we start to lose sight of the simplicity or the need for simplicity or a simplifying effect that we should be having on our companies. And if any leader, I'm not talking engineering leader, CEO out, any leader, our job is to actually do that. Our job is to simplify these things. And our job is to say, we're going over here, here's how we're doing it. We need to get out of our own way.